Well, for me, during those 12 startups, what I just knew, and it hit home so much, was that I was an entrepreneur. I was a terrible manager, and I am a terrible manager, and I was a terrible technician, and I am a terrible technician. But for me, it was the entrepreneurial role that I played quite well. But the challenge I had, because it was just me, like I could get things going, but there was no technician to be able to deliver the surface or the product, because that's where I fell short. The number one, without question, is you have to be good with people. It's about being human.
Welcome to another episode of Leading with Integrity, where this month we are currently immersed in the heart of leadership, a people-first journey, which is a month-long series of episodes that we are doing in November. And today, for the next step on that little series, we are venturing into the entrepreneurial world with Adrian Knight. Adrian is an acquisition entrepreneur and a business turnaround expert. He's had more than a dozen companies and startups in his career and been involved with quite a few more, giving him a unique wealth of knowledge when it comes to what makes people and teams tick. We'll be unpacking his unique experiences, the lessons learned from the 12 failed startups and the other successful ones that he's been involved with. And as usual, I'm sure we're going to be talking a bit about leadership too. Whether you consider yourself a seasoned entrepreneur or an experienced manager or a newcomer to leadership, there will be wisdom here for all. So let's dive into those experiences, which Adrian will be very generously sharing with us today from his business and management journey. This is Leading with Integrity, Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK. So trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Adrian, thank you for joining me this morning. And for the first time in a while, it's this morning for both of us because we're both on the same side of the pond. So I can't remember the last time that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's it's really nice to be here, David. And absolutely, we were just talking about that. We're not actually that far away from each other. So it feels very familiar and cozy already. So
yeah, good. Pleased to hear it. Yeah, it's a weird coincidence. Didn't plan it that way, but there we go. Yeah. So to kick the episode off, I'm going to hand over the virtual reins to you to introduce yourself, tell listeners a bit about your background and what you do today and why you do it.
Absolutely. So I am a business owner. I've always been very entrepreneurial. I am a terrible startup entrepreneur. So I had 12 failed startups before I started to find some success in business. There was a very long period in my life, going from failure to failure, but I wouldn't change anything for the world. What I do is I buy, turn around, build value, and then sell businesses, essentially. So I buy and sell businesses, but with that, I'm looking to add value to them. I made my first acquisition, it was quite a few years ago, which was a 30-year-old consultancy that specialized in like exit planning, so building value in the business in preparation for a sale. And then it would physically sell them. So that business has sold, when I had it, about 150 million pounds worth of small businesses. I bought that for £1 and I sold it 2 years later. I had a very nice return on my £1 investment. And yeah, I've been doing that ever since, really. In the process of doing that, I've also built up a group of children's education businesses that are primarily based in the UK. We currently educate 10,000 under 5-year-olds every academic term. And I've got a very good team in there who runs that business day to day, which sort of gives me the bandwidth to be able to look at sort of further opportunities to grow it.
Wow. So 12, did you say, failed startups? Wow.
12 failed startups. Yeah.
I mean, good on you for sticking with it, though.
I just had this, ever since I was young, I just had this idea that I didn't see myself working like a typical 9 to 5, but I didn't know what I saw myself as. I just knew it wasn't that. And I started my entrepreneurial career quite early. I was sort of 13 years old when I started, on my journey. And I did have some minor successes back then, which for me were at the time were huge successes. I was so proud. But as I got into my 20s, I really struggled with a lot of personal issues more than anything else. I had a nervous breakdown when I was 19, and that completely bottoms me out. And I made a decision that I was going to sort of deal with that, but in an organic way. I didn't want to take medication, which I was prescribed. I wanted to deal with that. And so that was a big part of many of the failures, because to overcome that, I came to a place where I realized I had to first sort of address these issues that were the real bottlenecks to the business. It was quite a twisting journey. Yeah,
and there's that famous saying, isn't there? Well, I don't know how famous it is, but you see it on social media quite a lot about how many super successful entrepreneurs there are who have never had a failed business. The answer is a very low number. So, I think it's nothing to be ashamed of, is it? It's not really a failure. It's just a lesson learned each time.
It's exactly that. And those early failures, they shaped my perception a great deal about what it means to have a business, to be a business owner, to be an entrepreneur, to be in business, to be serving people, to be organizing the components of that. And it also gave me a lot of clarity of where I fit in to that picture, because no one is a jack of all trades. And I think the first big leap that a lot of entrepreneurs can have is when they truly recognize and accept what their role is in the business, and it's not the whole thing. And quite often, I still believe it now, we are our biggest bottlenecks, which is exactly why I stay out of the children's education group, because I want it to grow and for the impact we're having on the kids' lives to grow.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. It's how many managers and leaders over the years as well who get themselves into so much trouble by trying to do everything instead of just recognizing the bit they're good at and then trusting others to do the rest. So it's a super important lesson to learn. And I'm really curious. I mean, buying a business for £1, who wouldn't want to try that? But how do you get started doing that? What made you try it in the first instance, and how did you kind of turn that into a career, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I always had this idea and this was actually going back to my teens, my early 20s, I always had this idea that I wanted to buy and sell businesses. There was no logic, no context for it. There was nothing in my world that remotely, was related to that. I just and there were no like celebrity CEOs like there are today, and maybe like Richard Branson or a couple of minor ones, but none of them who are actually doing that. So there was no context for it, but I just had this idea that I thought I'd like to do that. And I also recognized that was a bit of a stepping stone that I wanted to take. I felt doing a startup was kind of a rite of passage, that I would learn a lot of business skills that would equip me for that buying and selling businesses. Because I just thought, well, if I went to a business now at say 20, I wouldn't know how to do the finances or what marketing really is. And there was such massive knowledge gaps essentially. And so, yeah, I sort of parked the idea for well over a decade. And then it was my last startup, which was probably my most successful one, but it was successful in the sense that it didn't fail. Like it had a small team of people, and we did have like a good reputation in the sector, but it wasn't making any money. I was like barely getting by. When I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife, Vicky, like I literally couldn't afford to put petrol in my car. Like it was so embarrassing. She was, we'd gone away and she was having to fill up the car, because I literally couldn't do it. That was the state of it. And I'd been working in that for like 5-6 years. And so it was quite long into its journey. And then I discovered I was going to be a dad. And I was super excited, but also super scared as well, because I always saw myself as being there and being quite hands-on. I wanted to, and I am today, a hands-on dad, and I really enjoy that role. But I was working every hour under the sun in this business. I wasn't making any money. I was like, how could I be there, let alone support this? Like, something needs to change. And we were on our so we'd done a baby moon, so we had a short weekend away down in Sardinia before I think Vicky was about 6 months pregnant, and I got an email newsletter come through about learn how to buy businesses, and everything came rushing back, and I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And so the starting point for me, and it's the starting point I recommend to anyone who's even considering this, whether it's buying or selling, if you've got an established business, you have to get educated. There's no question around it. There's no way around it. When you're buying and selling businesses, there is risk. There is risk. And that's one of the reasons why you want to buy a business for £1. Like, it's not so much how, it's like, why do you want to do it? It's because there is risk. And so I got myself educated. I essentially cleaned my desk, cleared the decks, and went on this training course. And then I just went for it after. And I made that acquisition 3 months after going through that course.
What I find particularly interesting about this story is, I mean, certainly from my own experience and with a fair majority of the business owners I've ever met, the reason they started their business is because they've been and done that 9 to 5, and for whatever reason become very disillusioned with that whole process, and then decided, right, I'm going to do it myself, which is very opposite to your experience. And I'm trying to think of anyone I've ever met before who's always known that they wanted to run a business and buy a business and be an entrepreneur themselves. And I mean, if I could think of anyone, it would certainly be enough to count on one hand. So, yeah, I mean, do you think having that kind of vision from so early on is the reason why you've been able to make a success of it? Or is it just because that's why you've stuck with it enough failed businesses to realize that success?
I think you've hit on a really important point here, really important point. And I want to answer that question from a slightly different angle.
Please do.
So, and I see this as, I have looked at hundreds upon hundreds of businesses from I'm considering buying this perspective. I've gone through hundreds and hundreds of financials, spoken to hundreds and hundreds of business owners, and the very, very large majority of them are exactly what you described. They are essentially the technicians. So they, just as an example, trained as a mechanic, done that career as an employee, decided they wanted to go out on their own, and they started a car garage and built up their business that way. And over the years, they've built up a good, successful business, but they started as that technician. And the biggest challenge that those business owners face is actually it's the thinking like an entrepreneur. And many of them are managers. Some of them are not natural managers. Some of them they're very good hands-on managers. Sort of player coaches is sort of the term I normally use, but they lack that entrepreneurial aspect to them, which is why their businesses remain small businesses, essentially, why they get to that size. And I mean, there's very few small businesses that break the $1 million a year in revenue, whether that's US dollars or pounds or euros, whatever that currency is. I forget the actual figure, but I think it's about 9% of businesses will be over $1 million in revenue, and that's a large reason why. And the best explanation I've ever seen of this, which is a very popular book, very well-known book, is The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, where he talks about these three levels. You have the technician, you have the manager, and then you have the entrepreneur. And a big part of growing your business is learning to put the technical knowledge into stuff like operations manuals and standard operating procedures, then to have the management role. But then as a business owner, you play the entrepreneurial role. Well, for me, during those 12 startups, what I just knew, and it hit home so much, was that I was the entrepreneur. I was a terrible manager, and I am a terrible manager, and I was a terrible technician, and I am a terrible technician. But for me, it was the entrepreneurial role that I played quite well. But the challenge I had, because it was just me, I could get things going, but there was no technician to be able to deliver the surface or the product, because that's where I fell short. And so, as someone who buys and sort of adds value to businesses, I've sort of put myself into an arena almost where I'm playing to my skill sets, because the team's already there and the system's already there, so I can go in and just do what I do best.
I think that's the right way to look at it. And I mean, as you were talking through that story, that answer, I'm starting to see parallels between that and leadership as well. I mean, there's so many managers out there, and I talk about accidental managers quite a lot. And they're, these people are promoted because they're good at being the technician, effectively, in the usual three terms, but they're never given those skills to be a manager, or a manager of technicians even. And it's a similar thing with leadership, isn't it? And when you think about how many of these bad managers that are out there, how many company founders who don't really understand their people, and it's a similar problem. I think they're in those positions because they're really passionate, interested, and good at the technology or the product or the process that their business does, and so that's why they're doing it. That's why they've started a company to do it. But that can only get you so far if you can't also build a team, lead a team, get everyone to achieve the shared goals. So it's really interesting dynamic, isn't it?
It is, and I've got a very real world example of that. So my last acquisition had 10 people in the business, and there were two managers. You had a sales manager, and you had a project manager who was delivering the project. And the sales manager was the owner's best mate, who they'd known since they were kids. And the project manager was he's about 10 years younger than the owner. A bit more. He's about 15 years younger. But the owner used to coach him on the football team. And so from the owner's perspective, what he had done was he thought he was putting people into the right seats because he could trust them. But the reality is he put ill-equipped people in there to run those functions. And actually the project manager was, when I got into there, I discovered was essentially stealing from the business under the owner, but it was so close to the owner. And these are very real problems, very common problems you see in, sort of like when looking at businesses from this perspective. And so within 6 months of taking ownership of that business, I flushed out that project manager quite quickly, got him out and got someone else in. And the sales manager, I essentially demoted and then promoted one of his team members who showed amazing, and he still works for me today, this guy. He's just a great guy, very talented, amazing leadership and management skills. But in that process, that was a very delicate process, being able to demote someone and then promote one of their team members so he then reports to them. I made it really clear what my definition and expectation of management was. So for me, it wasn't like keeping all the sales leads and, being the biggest biller in the office. For me, management is, it's risk analysis. It's looking at different scenarios. It's planning. It's supporting and coaching your team. Like, there's various aspects to that. And as I was explaining that, I mean, he was almost agreeing with me, like, yeah, that's not me. But that's a very common problem in small businesses. It's
Yeah, I think, having been in that position myself, not on a sales side, but funnily enough, project management. But anyway, I definitely wasn't stealing from the business either. But I think that I talk quite a lot about why it's a bad thing to do from a leadership perspective, but for the individual as well, it's so unfair because they don't have the skill set to do it. They're not being given the training to change that, but they're also expected to do the job somehow. And what it will probably mean in most cases is they'll come very quickly to hate their job, hate the idea of being a leader or manager, and maybe not want to do it again for quite a long time. And so you're frustrating someone's career progress as well by doing this, even though paradoxically you've promoted them. So yeah, it's a real common problem, as you say.
Yeah, and particularly for me, sales. You touched on it earlier. Like someone who's really good at sales, then promoted into management. Well, they're two very different skill sets, and that's exactly what happened in this scenario. Yeah. Brilliant at sales, but as sales management, no.
Yeah. And the sales is the example that everyone uses. And I think it's because it's such a powerful example, because you've not only basically taken out one of your highest performers by making them the manager, but you've also, because they're not equipped to be the manager, you've damaged the performance of all the others as well. So
that's true.
Yeah. Next question I have for you, I think we've probably talked around this a little bit already, but if you could condense it into a few smaller points, maybe, what skills would you say you need if you're going to be successful at buying small companies and then turning them around?
The number one, without question, is you have to be good with people. It's about being human. When people think about buying and selling businesses, they very naturally tend to go to, I have to be an accountant, or I have to be, high financial knowledge, and that is important. I'm certainly not understating that, but at this level, like businesses certainly sub 5 million in annual revenue, which is the majority of them, it's about being good with people. It's about recognizing that this business you're thinking of buying is someone's life work. They've, gone back to that technician and the journey they've been on. They spent 15, 20, 25 plus years building this, and they're looking for a safe pair of hands. And fundamentally, you need to sort of show them why you're that safe pair of hands and facilitate that process. There's often a big discrepancy between what they think the business is worth and what the business is actually worth. So it takes real rapport and relationship to be able to navigate that part of the conversation, because that's where most deals fall flat.
Interesting. Another parallel to leadership, of course. It's got to be about the people. Yeah. Of all the companies that you've bought, that you've turned around, is there one that you're most proud of?
There is actually. I'm really proud of. It's a national children's franchise called Joe Jingles, and I think currently we have around 50 odd franchise partners across the UK. Between them, they deliver hundreds of classes every single week, hundreds of them, and we educate in that business around it's 9,000 to 10,000 under 5-year-olds every single academic term. It's got a wide reach to it, and that business is it's coming up to 30 years old, and it was one of the first in the sector, and it's got such a strong brand to it, where we now have people who, like mums who like come into classes with their son or daughter because they went there as a kid, and they're going with like granny or granddad. So like 3 generations of children, sometimes even 4, turning up to classes. And when I looked at that business, it was in real trouble, like real trouble. It was so highly impacted by COVID because all the classes shut. It used to be over 100 franchise partners across the UK, and so the network halved. And the owner was at their wits' end. They just wanted to be out. They've been trying to sell the business for 5 years, couldn't sell it, which is a very common problem. And basically, they heard I bought another children's franchise, and I thought, well, maybe he's interested. And like we got the business, I think literally a few months before it was about to go into irreversible like financial trouble, and the whole network and all of those livelihoods of the franchise partners who were running these classes would have collapsed, and managed to turn that around within 12 months. So in our like August accounts of 1 year, you've got this huge deficit in terms of like the yearly profit, and then 1 year later we've got this bigger profit. Like it's actually profitable, but there's a decent sized profit there. And we recently, just a couple of weekends ago, we had our annual conference, so we had the whole network for the weekend. We had a big hotel and put on like as guest speakers and celebrations and awards and all that, and it was just such a lovely vibe, and it was just such a unity of people. And I was just sitting there, and I'm not involved day to day. I can't take any credit for that. It was absolutely the team, but I was just sitting there feeling so proud, because the fate of that business could have been very different. And seeing the people like the franchise partners who are saying, they've been doing this for 10 years and they love it and it fits in with their family life. I'm like, well, amazing. Like we managed to keep that going for them. And I just feel really proud by that.
And rightfully so, I think. It sounds amazing. And I appreciate the humility as well of saying, I can't take the credit for that. But at the same time, the business wouldn't be there if you hadn't got involved. So I think you deserve some credit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think as much. I mean, from my role, the biggest thing I do, I guess, is take risks. Like, because it's like in the very extreme worst case scenario, it's my neck on the line, not anyone else's. And I do, like, the way I structure things and the way I operate is all about minimizing that risk. Which is again why you want to be properly educated. But it like that was the team who done that, and I'm just equally as proud of them. So
good, pleased to hear it. And so you've obviously must have interacted with a lot of business owners over the years, and you've mentioned already about having that focus on the people and that being a key aspect, which I think is true for a business owner in any case, really. But are there any particular behaviours you think that would stand out as being really the most common among the successful business owners? I guess maybe you don't deal with many successful ones given what you do, but I'm asking anyway.
No, I do. I don't end up acquiring many of the successful ones because they've already done a lot of the bits that I would look to go in and do. And we touched on it earlier. The successful ones, they are thinking less like technicians and less like managers, and they're thinking more like entrepreneurs. So they are, whereas say the large majority, I think probably 97, 80% of the businesses that I speak to and that I've spoken to, they're still thinking about, the new model of cars coming out, and we've got these tools that will, sort of fix that. That's a really bad example. But the entrepreneurial, say, garage owner is thinking, we've seen a great return on that marketing campaign and have identified new areas where we can go into. And they're thinking, how can we get our process of changing that wheel down into a document so that we can get anyone in and they can do it? Like, that's how they're thinking, and it's very different, and it's evident. Like, the size of the business is normally a reflection of the mindset of the owner. Like, it's so closely correlated. It's really telling. And so, with the successful ones, it's down to that mindset, and equally with the ones who haven't quite cracked it, it's normally down to that mindset as well. So.
Interesting. I'm not sure what that says about the solopreneurs like me, but
Solopreneurs are very different. Like solopreneurs,
yeah.
it's very different aspirations, and also very different business models, because it's not, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. It's a common phrase, and there's nothing wrong with being, a solo entrepreneur, but making really good profits. Like arguably, is that better? Certainly for some of the businesses, because when you start managing people and getting into wider businesses, it does bring a lot of headaches.
Fair enough. I was partly just teasing you there, but
yeah.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about leadership then. So I'd be really interested to hear, what is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned from your whole career so far?
So it's definitely people, which is, leadership. It's about people. I've always sort of coming out of my 20s and coming out of those sort of startups and recognizing I'm more the entrepreneur than, say, the technician or the manager. Certainly earlier into that journey, I was far more, I hire a manager, leave them to it, give them plenty of bandwidth to go and do their thing basically, and hire someone, to perform that role. In hindsight, there has to be, certainly at the beginning, there has to be more boundaries around that and more controls around that, because it's worked for me a couple of times. It's worked for me really well a couple of times, that approach. But I've probably had more times where it hasn't worked for me. And so, I'm all for, there's a balance there. I'm all for giving people bandwidth and giving people the room to be able to go and to prove themselves and to run with things and to use initiative. And people get really, like the good people get really excited by that. But whereas before I wouldn't put like a fence around that, even albeit a wider fence, I do that a lot more now. So
when you say put a wider fence around it, what kind of fences are we talking about?
Yeah, so it's having what I see a lot in small businesses is micromanagement, and it comes to at varying levels, and that's normally down to the insecurities of the business owner, like being completely frank about it, and that stifles people. It also stifles whether someone's right for a role or not, because you've not really been able to see how they operate. I've taken the completely opposite approach, which is giving too much bandwidth. And so those boundaries is having, for example, sitting down with them and having clear deliverables over the next quarter. This is what we're looking for. And then discussing together, how do you think we're going to achieve that? And if they're a new manager in the business, then it's having the conversation with them that if they're new to this role, then at the beginning, it is going to be a bit more micromanaged. We're going to need to tell them, like, this is what you need to do. And it may come across as micromanagement, but the whole purpose is that it's like, they just need to accept that we've been in this situation. You just need to trust us, like we're just going to get straight to the answer. But then as they move forward and they like with time, you start to release that and be like, that's the goal we're after. Go out there, do it, build your own plan, even let's go through your plan together, but also look out for opportunities and stuff like that. So it's just having a clear pathway for them.
Which sounds like good leadership to me. But I don't know about fences, but it's, yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a question of balance, isn't it? And walking that line between not micromanaging them, but also giving enough support, I think is the way I'd look at it. Because it's, it is possible, I think, to still offer the support in much the same way as you've described, actually, without just not letting them be empowered or autonomous or able to feel like they can go out and take risks and fail occasionally. And all of those important things that are central really to, I think, success in most roles, but certainly in things where you want to build creativity and innovation and all of those nice things that make businesses last.
Yeah, and I just love enthusiasm and initiative, those two things together go so far. They go so far, and having too much constraints tends to bottle that, but equally having it too loose and wild doesn't give it the support it needs to develop and grow that initiative and enthusiasm, or the confidence in their own enthusiasm. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the other way to look at it is there's a lot of people out there who would be probably less able to go out there and push those boundaries without that level of support. So,
yeah,
I mean, there's always one, isn't there, who will go off way further than you want them to. But,
it's reining back in. Yeah.
It is interesting though. Yeah, and I totally agree with everything you say about micromanagement. I think that is the quickest way to kill enthusiasm in the business, in my experience, and initiative, really.
And the business as a whole in many ways, because it either completely takes out any enthusiasm, so they just turn up and do what's required, or they leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then we get into things like quiet quitting, and this might be quite a difficult question for you, actually. I'm curious though. What would you say has been your best experience of being led?
So my best experience of being led actually has been outside of the business world. So I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to go off too far off topic, but about 2 years ago now, I was waking up in the early hours of the morning and having extreme anxiety and panic attacks, to the point where I'd be laying there for like an hour and a half in complete and utter dread, thinking everything was caving in, and then I would sort of talk myself out of that and then get up and be absolutely exhausted. But it got to a point where I decided to go and see a therapist about this, because I was like, this can't continue. And so my time with that therapist, and I'm still in contact with him today, has been truly wonderful. And he helped to guide me out of a place where I was like all business, 100% like business. And the way he illustrated this, so I could start to see, was he said, like, imagine you've got a car with 4 wheels, and one of the wheels is your love and relationships, another wheel is fun and recreation, another wheel is health and fitness, and another wheel is work and career. He was like, your work and career wheel is like overinflated to the point that it's about to burst, and the other 3 are flat. He's like, that's your life right now. And that's why I was waking up with these, having this level of anxiety. And he guided me through a very like sort of personal process of being able to come down from like a very like, I'm really ambitious. And so it felt like, I've got to give up on the ambitions. He guided me through that process to a point where I'm like, today I'm in a much healthier place. Like my 4 wheels are balanced, and if anything, my work wheel is slightly under deflated. But what's been remarkable is that like business has never been better. Like I've made more money than I ever have, and business is bigger than it. Like it's a truly like remarkable journey, which was very much led by him. So
well, that was a great answer to that question, I have to say. Wow. Well, I'm pleased to hear that it's problem solved in inverted commas, but it's a funny problem though, isn't it? I think it's quite common to most entrepreneurs, isn't it? Is overinflating that particular wheel. And I think that's maybe why we've seen so many of these kind of solopreneur and small business. I guess they used to call them lifestyle businesses, didn't they? But I think that's out of fashion now. There's people kind of breaking with the trend. And I think for exactly that reason. And then obviously with the COVID of it all as well, I'm sure that had a massive added impact to mental health.
Yeah.
Particularly at work. Yeah, it is an interesting one though. I think even today still doesn't get enough attention in my opinion.
I completely agree. And people often like come to me and want to talk about business, and like they're like, a lot of the questions are being asked from a place of like, what you're doing and how can I do something similar? What can I learn? Like, and I fully respect that, because and I am exactly the same when I speak to people, sort of levels beyond kind of where I'm at. But I always say, well, everything changed for me when I started to take care of me. Like, that's the secret sauce. It was I started prioritizing myself in terms of my health and well-being, not just like physical health, but like mental, emotional, physical. And that's when everything started to change, like, positively. And I didn't even expect it, to be honest. I just knew I didn't want to continue waking up from feeling like that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for employers as well, being a bit more open to that kind of thing, and accepting that people need to look after themselves first in a lot of respects. Entrepreneurs may struggle with that a lot, but ultimately they're also most in control of their own fate, I think, compared to the average employee, at least.
And that's part of the problem, because the blessing of working as an employee is that you have that structure. The freedom that comes with entrepreneurship is a blessing and a curse, and you have to learn to manage yourself within that context, which I wasn't doing very well previously.
Well, it's an important lesson, 100%. Which maybe leads us into the next question, which is, what do you think is the biggest mistake that a leader can make?
It's a really hard question to answer, because there's so many things that come to mind. Like, leadership for me has many different definitions to it and many different roles. And quite often I think about leadership, and one of the first images that comes to mind is like World War II. You see it on the old movies and the documentaries, and those people like jumping over the fences and leading their troops, like leading from the front. And that is without question leadership. But then I also think that, like a shepherd is a leader as well, but the shepherd's at the back, and the way its flock of sheep are, directed and guided to get where they want to go. And that's equally leadership as much as the person leading from the front. And I quite often think about that, like, which one is right, which one's wrong, which one's better. And I honestly don't know what the answer to this, but what I do think is it goes back to roles. And I think sometimes we just need to understand what type of leadership role we fit into, whether, if you're more of a shepherd and, you're jumping over the front or leading from the front all the time, does that make sense? Like, and equally, if you're jumping from the, if you're more of that person jumping from the front, but you're in the back of the, are you living that? And so I'm certainly not saying that a shepherd never has to jump from the front. I think it does, but I don't know. I think it's just understanding what are your strengths and how are you wired, and where do you sort of fit in that context? I
do know what you mean. I think for me, it's a lot of it is dependent on the situation and the people you're trying to lead as well. So to take your two examples, I think the shepherd and the soldier or the sergeant or whoever could both have been the same leader. It's just they're in very different situations, so they're reacting differently. And the soldier knows in that situation what his followers need to see is him at the front, giving them the courage to follow him. Whereas with the shepherd, he knows that what the sheep need to see is him at the back watching over them. It's very situational, it's very circumstantial, and it's very dependent on the needs of the people you're leading as much as it is on anything you are or do as the leader.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Leadership is such an intangible concept, yet it's so tangible as well. It's such a paradox to.
It is.
And it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
I think one of the really fascinating things about it is how every single individual you ask about it has a different understanding of what it is, and a different definition of what it means, and different expectation of what it looks like from their own leaders. And it makes it quite difficult sometimes, actually. But also means we can never get tired of talking about it, of course.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the time travel question is here.
Okay.
If you could go back in time to, do you say it was 13 when you started your first business?
Yes, 13.
Okay. So if you could go back in time and talk to a 13-year-old Adrian, what advice would you offer him?
It would be all right. Like, it will be all right. It's yeah, we have good times and bad times, but either way, like, it will be all right. Like, just keep going as well, which is obviously the a key one. But assuming that that's in place, it's be all right. It'll be all right.
Nice. Short and to the point. I like it.
Yeah.
And almost got a Disney quote in there as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good advice, I think. Yeah.
Leadership Heroes.
Last question. Favourite question. Usually the most difficult one. I'm sure you've been dreading it, but here we go. It's called Leadership Heroes. And my question to you is, if you had to pick one person, they can be anyone you like, alive, dead, past, present, real, fictional, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. So there is someone who comes to mind quite quickly. And like, again, to set a bit of context, I do quite a lot of extreme endurance events. It's just a part of my life that I've really come to love and enjoy. And so the leader who comes to my mind, one of my greatest heroes, is Ernest Shackleton, who led the expedition to the South Pole, and it was a failed mission. And him and his crew got their ship, which was a wooden ship. It was back in, I think it's the 20s, maybe not even earlier. It got iced in, and so they were stranded and stuck. And so Ernest Shackleton, with a small group of people, I think it was 2 or 3 of them, they made their way through Arctic conditions to the coast. They then got into a rowing boat and rowed across the sea during hurricane-like winds and the most treacherous part of the ocean in the world, over to an island in order to get aid. And when they got to that island, they then had to scale a mountain to come down the other side to get to the whaling station. And the most remarkable thing about the story is that they then went back and the whole team survived. And for me, that was, and is just true leadership, true leadership. And what a man.
That is such a good choice that I'm amazed we've not had it before.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I mean, Shackleton, such an amazing story. Funnily enough, we were on holiday down in Cornwall just earlier this year, and there's this old museum there in a little village down there that it's been there for years, probably decades, and it was called the Shipwreck Museum. But this year we went back and they had a whole new exhibit about Shackleton, and it was and that specific expedition as well, twice the size of the existing museum. I don't know where they've done it or how they've done it, but it was really incredible. And they had all of the old photographs, because of course it was one of the first expeditions that had an actual photographer with all of his equipment on the expedition. So it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways, but that was one of them. And being able to see that visual record and the ship when it gets stuck and then when it finally collapsed, and just the starkness as well of the Arctic environment, and how, I mean, especially back then as well, when it was literally new ground, nobody would have known what to expect. Utterly terrifying.
But that's just it. And it's always fascinated me. And so in March of this year, I actually participated in a multi-day endurance event in the Arctic Circle. So it was over the Norwegian Arctic. And as soon as I landed there and got to the most northern sort of town where we were staying before we sort of went off on our adventure, I went out, and in the town I was staying, they had an old museum with one of the ships from the old, it wasn't Shackleton, but the old Arctic explorers, and seeing it, it's literally wood, and they're covered in animal fur, and I mean, we were out at minus 17 degrees, and you just think, wow, there we were in our, we camped out with some sleeping bags and all of the gear. How did they do that at that time, a period of our time? It was just it was so eye-opening to what it just added more flavor to that journey of Shackleton and that story. So yeah.
Yeah. And they were there for months as well, not days. So
they were, yeah.
And it must have been, was it even years?
I can't remember the exact period, but their ship was crushed by the ice. And so seeing how like that being crushed must have been completely soul destroying, because you're literally in the Antarctica and no one's coming for you. Your captain's gone, you survived, like this. It's just unimaginable in so many ways, which is why it's such a great story.
Yes. Of course, the next story wasn't so happy ending, but
no,
let's not talk about that one.
No.
Well, Adrian, it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing all about what you do. So the last thing, if any of the listeners want to learn more about you or maybe get in touch with one of your businesses, is there a website or a book or something you'd like to point them towards?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm most active on social media. So my handle is Adrian J Knight. It's Knight with a K and OS. That's the same for LinkedIn, Instagram. I've got a TikTok profile, but don't really use it. I'm very active on Instagram. I post on there several times a day, and I really try to give insights of what's actually going on, but the reality, not just like the shiny stuff, the reality of it. So I love connecting with people on Instagram and always get back to messages as quickly as I can. Lovely.
Well, I'll pop a few of those links in the episode description as well, so people can find them easily and don't have to remember how to spell them.
Yeah.
Always find that helps. Yeah, and that's really all we've got time for. So thank you again so much for joining me this morning.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, David.
Well, I trust that Adrian's insights rang true with you as they did with me. And the entrepreneurial narrative there, from setbacks to triumphs and the enduring importance of people skills, really does echo across various fields and industries. And there's more than a few central truths, if you like, for leadership in there too. For those hungry for more, you will find all of Adrian's info in the episode description. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do hit that button wherever it is that you're listening, and that'll help you stay in the loop as we approach the midpoint of our November series on the heart of leadership. And listener, thank you for being here again today. Don't be afraid to reach out to me and share your own thoughts, comments, or experiences of leadership generally, or about anything specifically talked about in this episode. And let's continue growing together on this exploration of leadership. If you are indeed interested in learning more about leading with integrity, perhaps you'd like to have a one-to-one chat with me. Maybe you want to take the leadership quiz that I've mentioned a few times now. And perhaps you're even considering joining my online community of leaders, which is called Integrity Leaders. If any of that is true or is now, then please do pay a visit to www.leadernotaboss.com to learn more. And on the subject of that community, I am currently looking for a few new leaders, first-time leaders, new managers, maybe even new founder, someone who's expanding a team for the first time. And what I'm looking for is someone who would be willing to help me test out some new functions and some new content themes that we're doing on the platform at the moment. In return for your help, your participation, your honest feedback, I'm happy to offer complimentary or free membership for a limited time. So take advantage of that. To do so, find me on LinkedIn, drop me a message, let me know that you're interested. That's pretty much all I've got time for today. I hope you will join us again in the next episode as we continue uncovering these stories and lessons that really shape the leadership narrative around people in particular. Next week, I'll be joined by Dr. Ravi Iyer. He is a physician, scientist, author, inventor, and has another unique and interesting point of view on leadership, people, and life. So I hope to see you there, hear you there. I hope you'll be there. I hope you'll listen again. And until then, thanks for being part of the Leading with Integrity journey. Be a leader, not a boss.